Hello my friends, and welcome. This is the true story of Bridget King. Bridget was born in Headford, County Galway, in 1834, to parents Margaret and Edward King. They also had 7 other children. The 5 boys who were Patrick, Michael, Thomas, Dennis, and John. They also had 2 more daughters, named Margaret and Catherine. As we all have learned, the 1840s were a particularly bleak period in Ireland's history. There was a population of over 8 million people, but the land was mainly held in the hands of a few hundred English landlords, who owned vast swathes of the country. Most of the people, like Bridget and her family, lived on small farms, usually just enough land to sustain a family for the year. And they were dependent mainly upon the potato as their main staple diet. Other food crops such as barley, corn, and grain were exported to England. These small farmers grew potatoes and a few seasonal vegetables to feed their families. This led to disastrous effects when in the period between 1847 to 1852, a series of potato blight struck. This became known as Ungorta Mór, the Great Famine, and led to the deaths of 1 million people, but it was also a catalyst for mass emigration. Poverty was endemic, and the population were desperate. Most found themselves in such dire circumstances that thousands of these poor, unfortunate people ended up in the workhouses as a direct result of the famine. Edward died before 1849, which would have left Bridget's mother destitute. She would have been in absolute poverty, and therefore unable to leave the country. It is unsurprising that Bridget and her mother Margaret, soon after Edward's death, had ended up as inmates in the Chewham workhouse. It is uncertain what happened to some of Bridget's other siblings, but it is presumed that some were at the workhouse too. The Chewham workhouse was officially established in 1839, and erected in 1840, but it was not until 1846 that it received its first inmates. It was to accommodate a capacity of 800, and it covered a large area of County Galway's northeast, including Bridget's hometown of Headford. The workhouse was the place where impoverished people, who had no income or home, sought refuge. They earned their keep by doing jobs in the workhouse. These so-called inmates consisted of orphaned or abandoned children, the physically and mentally sick, the elderly, the disabled, and unmarried mothers. People truly had to be destitute to enter, as life in the workhouse was harsh and cruel. Once families went in, they were separated, husbands from wives, and children from parents. They were not allowed further contact with one another, and punished if caught speaking to each other. The food was poor, there were many rules, and the punishments were harsh. People were hungry, frustrated, badly treated, bored, and mostly left without hope. Because of the overcrowding, and the weakened state of the people, disease spread rapidly, leading to large numbers dying. It is widely believed that many preferred prisons, as a better choice, to a life in the workhouse. In Westminster, London, the powers that be were getting concerned, not because of the inhumane treatment of the Irish population, but rather the inconvenience of the whole affair. This is when a scheme was devised by Earl Grey, Secretary of State for the Colonies, to relieve overcrowding in the Irish workhouses, and to meet the demand for domestic labourers and single young women. Under the scheme, he devised a plan to send those chosen, who were fit, disease-free, and strong enough, to work as servants and to help populate the colony in Australia. A total of 4,114 Irish orphans arrived on 20 ships over a 2-year period, between the years of 1848 and 1850. At that time the Board of Guardians was eager to assist the workhouse inmates to emigrate, as this would reduce the numbers in the workhouses, so there was plenty of people to choose from. Records from the workhouse show that Bridget was selected to go to Australia in 1849. So presumably, very soon after arriving into the workhouse, she had been given the chance for a new life. It can only be imagined that Bridget was willing to avail of the emigration scheme, as it offered hope in a time of despair and hunger. To have lived through the horrors of a famine was enough for her, and along with the horrors within the workhouse, the prospect of a life in a new world must have been so enticing, even if the end journey itself was a life of servitude and the production of babies. Those chosen from the workhouse to go to Australia had to fit a criterion. They had to be aged between 14 and 20 years of age and be healthy. From what has been learned thanks to Bridget's descendants, it is certain that she could read and write. She would have firstly had to have sailed to England, and from there she found herself on board a ship named the Panama, bound for New South Wales, with 156 other fellow Irish girls on board. The Panama left Plymouth on October 6, 1849, and it arrived in Sydney on January 12, 1850, with girls from Dublin, Carlow, Clare, Cork, Galway, Kilkenny, Mayo, Sligo, Waterford, and Wexford. It is nice to think that she had company of other girls from her locality, as it probably was a long and lonely journey, leaving what was left of her family and friends behind. Each girl was given a medical clearance and a sea chest of clothes, and other items necessary for life in Australia. They were cared for and highly regulated. Lord Grey envisaged that his scheme would help solve several problems such as less people to care for in the workhouses, domestic service which was lacking in Australia, and the need for marriageable women. Unfortunately, they were not received well locally at first. However, most of them settled down and became the little Irish mothers, raising families. On arrival in Port Jackson, the girls were housed in Hyde Park Barracks, and from their employers were found for them. They had the right to return to the barracks if any problems arose. Bridget was employed by a family in George Street, and we also know that according to the Irish Famine Memorial website, Bridget was employed by a Mr. T. Lucas, of Phillip Street in Sydney, for a short time. It is understood that the feisty girls were sent to Moreton Bay, in Brisbane, and Bridget is noted in a passenger list of the steamer named the Eagle, that she was one of the girls delivered to Moreton Bay in September 1851. The next piece of information which is known about Bridget, is that she married William Fitzgerald, in a Church of England setting, in Ipswich, just outside of Brisbane, on the 25th of February 1853, when she was 19 years old. He is described as a hawker in their marriage certificate, and that probably accounts for the fact that their 11 children were born in many different towns in the outback. However, the work of a hawker quite likely described an occupation, more like today's stock station agents, as he bought quite a lot of land, and also had an agent whose address Bridget used later in an advertisement in a newspaper in Sydney. On St. Patrick's Day, 17th of March 1858, when she advertised for her brothers Dennis and John to contact her if they ever got to read the message. It has been discovered that when she agreed, back in Ireland, to join the Lord Grey scheme, she would have known that her 2 brothers had been convicted and sentenced to 7 years transportation for stealing 2 sheep. It was in the middle of the famine after all. They were convicted in County Mayo, in a trial dated for June 13, 1849. They embarked on the ship named the London, which set off from Dublin and sailed on December 20, 1850, to Tasmania, which took a total of 89 days at sea, reaching Hobart Town on March 19, 1851. There were 272 prisoners altogether on the ship. They were transported with 2 other men, Roger and John Keane. Incidentally, from the marriage records found for Dennis, it appears that Roger Keane was a witness at the wedding. Her brothers were given their ticket of leave in 1852, and a pardon in 1853. Dennis married Joanna Beston, in 1855, in Richmond, Tasmania. They had 12 children in 23 years. He died on October 26, 1911, in Richmond, at the age of 85. His wife Joanna was born in 1840 in Limerick, to parents Patrick and Betty. She died on March 7, 1880, in Richmond, at the age of 40. As for her brother John, he married Eliza Brockall, on March 1, 1854, at St. George's Church, in Hobart, in Tasmania. They had 6 children in 12 years. Bridget probably had no idea that they had been sent to Hobart, or that it was so far away. She more than likely never knew going to Australia that Tasmania is an island state, located a very long way from where she was going to live. One can only imagine when she decided to go to Australia, that it must have been on her mind, that she would eventually meet with her 2 brothers. It's sad to think that despite her best efforts to try and connect with them, that she never saw them again. Bridget and William had many children together. They were named William, who died at the age of 20; Thomas, who was born in 1858 and died that same year. Then came a daughter called Maria. Then another little boy named Thomas, after his older sibling who had previously passed away. Then there were 3 more daughters named Margaret, Anne, and Rebecca. Another boy called William, again after his older sibling. And finally there was Bridget, born on the 14th of January, in 1880. Regarding Bridget's 10 children, 8 of them had survived infancies. By that time the family had settled in Winton, formerly known as Pelican Waters. There they took up land as settlers, and ran a dairy called Ayr and Go Bra. The one-teacher school in Winton opened in 1885, and Bridget's youngest son William and daughter Bridget are listed as attending in 1888. The final records so far found for Bridget is that of her death. She died on July 16, 1893, in Winton, Queensland, at the age of 59, and was buried there. Research is currently ongoing to see if there are any remaining relatives in the Headford area of County Galway. Bridget's story can also be read on the Galway Community Heritage website, a link to which I will leave in the description below. And if anyone wants to contribute to Bridget's story, they would love to hear from you. I will leave the contact information also in the description below. And finally, before I go, I would like to leave you with a quote from Colette, a descendant of Bridget, who said, "If Bridget is looking down from above, I am sure she is pleased that her advertisement has at last borne fruit." And that, my friends, was the real-life story of Bridget King. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.